A Russian platoon near Chazy didn't just retreat, they executed their own commander before surrendering en masse. But this wasn't a battlefield defeat, it was a revolt from within. The soldiers weren't trying to win, they were trying to survive their own army. This mutiny is more than just one incident. It exposes how Russia's war machine is collapsing under its own weight, with soldiers turning their guns inward. And the cracks are no longer hidden. They're erupting in plain sight, one command post at a time. But this isn't just about one failed mission. From mass desertions and foreign mercenaries to failing recruitment and economic freefall, Russia is bleeding from every direction. What happened near Chazy is just the beginning. The deeper truth is far more dangerous, and Putin might not survive it. Near the frontline city of Chazy, something unprecedented unfolded. Russian soldiers executed their own commander and crossed the lines waving white flags. According to Ukraine's defense intelligence, the unit had been ordered to storm fortified positions without artillery or armor. When their officer threatened to shoot anyone who refused, they turned their rifles on him instead. The act wasn't just impulsive, it was strategic. Facing certain death from their own side and no way back, surrender became the only option. But this wasn't an isolated breakdown, it was a signal. The Russian military isn't just bleeding soldiers, it's bleeding structure. Morale is collapsing, discipline is vanishing, and this moment near Chazy exposed a system imploding from within. Ukrainian troops reported that these mutineers came forward voluntarily, providing intelligence that revealed how command pressure, suicidal orders, and fear of Russian military police triggered the rebellion. In contrast to Russia's official media, which continues to broadcast stories of successful offensives, this event reveals the reality on the ground, a war machine cannibalizing itself. Russia still pours troops into Bakhmut, a city with little strategic value, while ignoring the human cost. And yet, even here, the soldiers rebelled, not against Ukraine, but against Moscow's orders. But that's what makes this moment so dangerous for Putin. It shows that fear alone is no longer enough to hold the ranks together. Russia has created an army that turns inward when pushed too far, and Ukraine now holds the blueprint of how to break it further. What triggered this revolt isn't just a battlefield loss, it's a warning sign of a deeper collapse. But the true extent of that collapse becomes even clearer when we look at who's actually fighting Russia's war now. The killing of a Russian commander by his own men wasn't just a moral collapse, it triggered a chain reaction. The mutiny near Chazy exposed a critical vulnerability. Russian soldiers are more afraid of their own orders than of the enemy in front of them. According to Ukraine's defense intelligence, this incident wasn't isolated. It's part of a deeper fracture across multiple Russian units stationed near Bakhmut. These soldiers weren't elite. Most were recent conscripts, thrown into fortified zones without artillery or armor. They were ordered to storm entrenched positions and threatened with execution if they refused. Once they turned their rifles on their officer, they had only one option left: surrender. Ukrainian troops on the front line captured them and passed on vital details that revealed how morale is eroding across the Russian front. But this wasn't just a localized breakdown. It's the most direct evidence that Russia's war machine is crumbling from within. Soldiers are no longer just dying, they're disobeying. And according to US and Ukrainian intelligence, desertion and surrender rates are rising in regions where troops are isolated, under-equipped, and led by command structures that demand blind obedience. The Russian system punishes hesitation with death, but now that fear is turning back on itself. Russia's military structure makes this situation even worse. Unlike Western doctrine, Russian command is centralized. Officers issue orders, and troops are expected to follow without question. When officers fall, chaos spreads, and that's exactly what Ukraine has exploited, with precision strikes targeting commanders to sever command chains and trigger confusion mid-battle. But the deeper problem is structural. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense estimated in June 2025 that Russia had already suffered 1 million casualties, dead and wounded, since the start of the war. U.S. estimates placed the number around 750,000 earlier in the year. That volume of losses means one thing: the Russian military is constantly replacing fallen soldiers with barely trained recruits. And here's the turning point: these soldiers know it. They're being asked to die for objectives measured in meters, while Kremlin media pretends these are strategic victories. But the maps don't lie. In Kyiv, Russia has gained just 50 meters per day on average, territorial gains that cost billions and thousands of lives. This is why what happened near Chasiv is so important. It wasn't just a rebellion, it was a rejection, a refusal to be another number in a war that has no clear goal. But if this is only the start of the breakdown, what happens when Russia runs out of men willing to fight? Russian casualties have now surpassed every conflict the country has faced since World War II. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, Russia reached 1 million dead and wounded by mid-2025. U.S. intelligence places that number closer to 750,000, but both agree Russia is running out of trained men. To fill the gaps, Russia is deploying fresh recruits with minimal training. Many receive only a week of preparation before being sent to the front lines. The result is a force that lacks basic tactical understanding and collapses under pressure. Officers lie about the readiness of their troops. Soldiers arrive without knowing how to respond to real combat. But this has created a vicious cycle. As experienced troops die, Russia replaces them with weaker units, leading to even higher losses. And because Russian command is centralized, killing a single officer can dismantle entire units. Ukraine has exploited this flaw, using drones and intelligence to strike commanders first, leaving conscripts confused, leaderless, and exposed. In contrast, Ukraine's forces are growing smarter, faster, and more agile. They adapt in real time, intercept Russian plans, and strike with precision. Meanwhile, Russia clings to a rigid doctrine that demands obedience, even when it leads to slaughter. Russian troops aren't just losing, they're being sent into missions they cannot win. But the numbers don't just show a military failure, they expose a collapsing system. Russia is advancing just 50 meters per day in key areas like Kyiv, despite pouring in hundreds of thousands of troops. That pace would require centuries to occupy Ukraine. And the cost isn't just measured in soldiers, it's draining the state. What happens when Russia's front lines become a graveyard of amateurs and Ukraine knows exactly where to strike next? The collapse deepened when Russia began importing soldiers from North Korea. In October 2024, 11,000 North Korean troops were deployed to the Kursk region as part of a counteroffensive. According to South Korean intelligence, within months, nearly 3,000 had been killed or wounded. Western sources estimate total losses reached 6,000, over half of the original force. These foreign troops weren't reinforcements, they were desperation. Communication failures between Russian and North Korean units led to friendly fire incidents. In two separate cases, North Koreans opened fire on both Russian and Chechen allies. Entire assaults fell apart, not from Ukrainian resistance, but from internal confusion. But this strategy backfired. Instead of stabilizing the front, it exposed a deeper problem. Russia is out of men it trusts to fight. The language gap, conflicting training methods, and cultural tensions created chaos within already fractured units. North Korean troops, fearing punishment from their own regime, often chose suicide charges over surrender. The battlefield turned into a death spiral. In contrast, Ukraine grew smarter. It offered safe surrender options like the I Want to Live campaign, targeting Russian conscripts with clear instructions and legal protection. Russia offered none, only prison or death. While Ukraine strengthened morale through transparency, Russia fed its troops lies and used terror as discipline. But the nightmare wasn't limited to North Korea. Footage shared by Iranian outlets in May 2025 showed Russian troops speaking Persian before an assault. Iranian and Russian fighters failed to coordinate under fire, arguing over positions and misreading orders. The consequences were fatal, and yet more Iranian fighters were sent. This wasn't just a tactical error. It marked a turning point. Russia began outsourcing its war to foreigners who didn't speak the language, didn't trust the command, and didn't believe in the mission. But if foreign soldiers are already dying in disorganized attacks, what happens when they become the majority of Russia's front line? Russian commanders no longer trust their own troops to hold a rifle. That's why by early 2025, Moscow deployed over 40,000 blockade troops, units positioned behind the front lines to shoot deserters and force soldiers forward. These were not rumors. Reports from the UK Ministry of Defence and intercepted radio communications confirmed their presence along multiple sectors. These troops weren't there to fight the enemy. They were stationed to kill their own. Russian infantry were ordered to advance under fire, knowing they could be shot from behind if they retreated. Internal documents leaked in April revealed that at least 38 such incidents were recorded in 1 month, most involving conscripts under 22. But the revelation runs deeper. This isn't just about controlling fear, it's about suppressing truth. Russia began altering official military statistics, hiding casualty counts and manipulating reports to maintain morale. Soldiers were ordered to destroy phones and social media accounts, and units were reshuffled to erase evidence of collapsed operations. In contrast, Ukraine amplified transparency. Casualty reports were verified by independent NGOs. Soldiers could report abuses without fear of execution. International media embedded with Ukrainian forces, while Russian commanders banned journalists entirely. The difference wasn't just tactical, it was existential. One side adapted to reality, the other rewrote it. But new drone footage leaked in May showed something even more disturbing: Russian troops shooting unarmed comrades attempting to surrender. The footage, verified by Bellingcat and cross-referenced by Amnesty International, confirmed what defectors had long claimed. Surrender is no longer an option in many Russian units. And if surrender is punished with death and truth is buried by fear, how much longer can discipline survive? Russian battlefield failures and internal intelligence leaks pushed Moscow into urgent recalibration. In early July, reports confirmed the Kremlin had approved the deployment of advanced A-50U surveillance aircraft to monitor Ukrainian troop movements. Russia's military doctrine began to shift. Instead of mass assaults, units started targeting Ukrainian supply nodes and rail lines with precision drone swarms. Satellite images revealed new launch zones in occupied Zaporizhzhia, indicating coordinated efforts to pressure NATO supply corridors. According to ISW analysts, these adaptations aim to prolong the conflict, exhausting Western support. But Ukraine also shifted. Kyiv accelerated the use of Storm Shadow missiles, donated by the UK, to strike logistical hubs in Crimea and Melitopol. These strikes disrupted Russian ammunition depots, forcing Russian convoys to reroute under threat. A fresh British intelligence brief confirmed that Russian frontline commanders were struggling to adapt to these new hit-and-run tactics. In contrast to previous static trench warfare, both sides embraced mobility and disorientation. Ukraine's use of AI-assisted targeting via NATO systems marked a break from conventional patterns. Meanwhile, Russia countered with increased ECM, electronic countermeasure deployments across Donbass. This tug-of-war of modernized warfare, confirmed by military analysts from Janes and Reuters, signals a shift toward asymmetric attrition rather than territorial gain. But Russia's adaptation came at a hidden cost. Several A-50U aircraft vanished from satellite view, possibly downed or withdrawn. And while Russia innovates tactically, its manpower shortage grows. According to Meduza, Moscow quietly expanded conscription in border oblasts to fill gaps left by elite losses. Both nations now operate under redesigned doctrines, but with increasingly fragile foundations. But if the war's shape is evolving, what comes next when both sides have fewer cards to play? On July 24, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense reported a shift in the Russian air campaign. Instead of large-scale drone swarms, Moscow began targeting specific military infrastructure in western Ukraine, including radar stations and electronic warfare hubs near Lutsk and Khmelnytskyi. According to military analysts at the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, this change indicates a tactical recalibration. The Russian forces now prioritize high-value systems that threaten long-range drone and missile operations. Ukrainian radar grids have become primary targets due to their role in early interception, but this adaptation comes with significant cost. Precision-guided strikes require satellite coordination and intelligence assets, suggesting deeper coordination between Russia's military and external intelligence support, possibly involving Iranian or Chinese reconnaissance platforms, as reported by Defense Express. This signals a broader strategic partnership influencing battlefield dynamics. Meanwhile, Ukraine has repositioned key air defense systems closer to Kyiv, leaving western regions more exposed. This trade-off reflects a calculated decision: protect political centers while accepting greater vulnerability along critical logistics corridors. But this strategic shift increases pressure on NATO's eastern flank, with Russian strikes inching closer to the Polish border. Any miscalculation could trigger direct engagement with alliance forces. The New York Times warns that NATO radar stations have already picked up anomalous drone echoes near Rzeszów. The real threat isn't just territorial, it's systemic. If Russia continues degrading Ukraine's radar network, the entire command and control grid becomes blind to hypersonic threats. This new stage of the war isn't about territory, but about perception, deterrence, and escalation management. And the next move might not be on the ground, but over the Carpathians, in airspace that's supposed to be safe. What began as a tactical shift in Russia's drone strategy has now transformed the very structure of modern warfare in Eastern Europe. The battlefield is no longer defined by borders, but by the invisible reach of satellites, radars, and preemptive strikes. This transformation forced Ukraine and NATO to rethink defense priorities, trading territorial coverage for political protection, and exposing the fragility of deterrence when escalation is constant. And with every radar destroyed, every border crossed by stealth drones, one question grows louder: what happens when the next strike doesn't stop at Ukraine?